Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our Between the Chapters book club for a Pride Month panel.
Thanks for having me.
Hey!
Sure,
Thank you
hi.
for having us.
I realized as I was talking, I am really talking very fast tonight, and I don't know why. I swear I haven't had coffee. Um, so I feel like I need to take a, if I start talking too fast, please someone yell at me to take a breath. Um, but I truly meant it when I said that I'm so excited to have all three of you joining us this evening. I love getting to host these author panel events, and I really love when I get to have new authors come join our book club. So, thank you all so, so much for coming and hanging out with me for the evening. Um, I think first things first, for any readers who haven't heard about you, heard about your books, I'd like to give them a chance to get to know you. So we're just going to start off with brief introductions. And I am going to have Courtney kick us off since you are a returning author to our book club. So please introduce yourself to our readers and tell us a little bit about your book.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. And so nice to meet you, Bart and Katie. And Lauren, I always love talking to you, and we'll try to maybe not cry this time. Who knows?
I just not likely. I
I
will probably
promise it.
cry.
My name is Courtney Kae. I live in Los Angeles. That is finally sunny today. Um, which I know that's like small, tiny violin to many people. But all right. What about me? I am a mom. I am an author. I work full time, so juggling a lot, but so excited to be here. Um, I my debut in the Event of Love came out almost a year ago, August 2022, which was a queer, sapphic, hallmarky rom com. And it's been amazing connecting with readers and other authors and our incredible community since then. And my follow up to In the Event of Love is In the Case of Heartbreak, and that releases July 25th.
Yes, and to any readers who don't already know, but In the Case of Heartbreak has the ultimate cinnamon roll of a character.
Thank you.
So I'm just saying, if you love a good cinnamon roll character, you're gonna want to check it out. And Courtney, you already know how much of a fan of yours I am, and yeah, I did forget to mention in my opening that I will probably end up crying at some point during this chat. I usually do. I'm very
Oh,
emotional.
me too.
Um,
And happy
so
Pride.
yes.
Right.
So thank you, Courtney. I'm going to jump over to Bart Yates next because you have the most recent book out that came out earlier this month. So please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your book.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bart Yates, and I live in Iowa City, smack in the middle of the country. And My cat will be putting in appearances here every once in a while. She's my co-writer. My book that just came out is called The Language of Love and Loss, and it is my sixth novel, and it's a sequel to my first novel, which came out 20 years ago. And that one, Leave Myself Behind, is being re-released at the end of this month. So they're kind of doing the 20-year reunion tour or whatever. So and I'm a musician. I teach music lessons too, clarinet, saxophone, and bass guitar, and write books, and seldom leave this chair. So that's kind of me.
That's perfect. I will say, speaking of crying, you will probably cry when you read The Language of Love and Loss, but in a good way. It's a good cry. It makes you feel good, but let me tell you, that one definitely made me cry quite a bit. But for good reasons. I do have to be nosy very quickly. What is your cat's name?
This is Nan. Like,
Love it.
yep, yep, there she is. There she is, putting in her
I
appearance.
am I am a pure cat lady at heart, so it makes me very happy every time she wants to jump on screen. She is more than welcome to answer a question. Um, all right, thank you, Bart. And now let's jump over to Katie, who is a debut author, book coming out at the end of this month. So please tell us about you and your upcoming book.
Yeah, hi everyone. Happy Pride. Yeah, my name is Katie Siegel. I am from New Jersey. Um, my book is called Charlotte Isles is Not a Detective. It is a gosh, so many people have been calling it so many different things. It's a mystery.
Yes.
That's everyone can agree on that. It's a sort of a new adult mystery about a young woman named Charlotte Isles who, when she was young, she was a kid detective, very successful one, but now she is 25 and she is uh, put detective days behind her, but in this book, she is finding herself pulled back into that world of mystery solving, and she has to figure out how to do that, somewhat against her will.
Yes, I have to say, as someone who got to read an early edition of Charlotte Isles is Not a Detective, I really felt for poor Charlotte in getting pulled into things that she just really did not want to do and has to do a little bit, against her will. Feels like a very, very real experience,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah,
for a lot
definitely.
of
A
us.
lot of people who have an idea of how she should be, and she is not sure if that's where she wants to go. It's, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I cannot wait to talk a little bit more about your upcoming book. And readers, don't worry, we're not going to spoil anything, especially with Katie's book, since it is not out yet. We're going to be very careful about all of that, but definitely very excited to talk a little bit more with you about it. All right, so I'm going to jump straight into a couple of the questions that I have prepared for everyone. First and foremost, let's just dive into I love, and I'm not going to say I did it on purpose, but I did it a little bit on purpose. We have a variety of genres represented here on our panel, which is always very exciting. And I want to start off with talking about what drew you to the genre that you're writing in. Was there a particular reason that you fell in love with it? Is there something about it that just makes you really happy? And then, since we are in the middle of Pride Month, I am curious, how do you feel that process of storytelling has really contributed to LGBT stories as a whole? Did you go into it with that purpose, or is it just kind of something that happened as you were writing? Like, I kind of jammed two very different questions into one, so it's fine if we want to just focus on one half and lead into the other. But let's start with Bart. What is it about your genre that drew you to it when writing?
So my genre kind of changes
Yeah.
with my mood all the time. It's like, so my first two books were gay narrators, and I almost always have gay characters in my books. But it, I don't know, the kind of the classic thing about like your first novel is mostly autobiographical. That seems
Mhm.
to be true in my case. That's closer to my life than anything else has been. And I just was writing. I wasn't really thinking about anything except telling a story, and from a 17-year-old gay boy's perspective in a small town, and that was what I
Mhm.
did. And since and then I kind of venture off into other genres. But yeah, I don't know. So what's the
So I guess the easy way to do a second follow up to that question is, why do you feel you were drawn to having your protagonist be a young gay man as you were writing this story? Did you make that a conscientious choice, or is it just something you felt had to happen for the story?
I think at the time, well, with my first book, it didn't come out. It came out in 2003, which
Mhm.
was a very different time in the country.
Right.
And there weren't a lot of, when I was growing up, there were no books out there for young gay people to read. It just they're
Mhm.
almost impossible to find, and so those were the stories that I wanted to read, and so I just decided to write my own. And it's wonderful now that there's so many out there in the world and so many great books that are there for LGBTQ people. But yeah, and I'm just happy to be part of it. It's never kind of, I never know if the next book is going to be in that genre or not. It just
Mhm.
kind of whatever comes out.
I love that. As a big mood reader, I love hearing from authors that are like, I don't know, I'm a mood author. Whatever I'm in at the moment is where I'm going. I've never really encountered that, and I love that. Like I said, I feel that deep in my soul. All right, thank you for those answers, Bart. That was perfect. I'm gonna jump over to Katie next because you're next on my screen. So,
Great way to
what
do
is
it.
it? What is it about your genre that drew you to it initially? Like you said, it does kind of cover multiple different genres, but it is mainly a mystery.
Mhm.
And then, did you consciously involve LGBTQ characters through that process as you were writing?
Yeah, so without giving the long version of the story, the book actually originated as a TikTok. That's how it all came to be. So, um, when I didn't go in planning on writing a mystery book, I made a mystery
Right.
TikTok, and then that became a mystery book. But I've always been a fan of mysteries. I read a lot of them growing up, and similar to what was said, I like looking back at the like books I read growing up. There were very few queer characters, so it wasn't really. I don't even remember. It feels like so long ago now that I like first started writing, but I don't even remember like taking a lot of time to make the decision that there will be queer characters. It was just kind of like, yeah, I wanted to write a story that where the characters reflected me and my friends and people in my life, and that was just like just doing it.
Right.
But I think, like we were saying, there's it's a mystery, and I think that it's also a little bit of a like a second coming of age story, which I think is something that everyone experiences one way or the other, but I think especially like queer people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's fun to see how like the parallels of like the mystery solving and like the coming of age thing. It's like figuring out what's going on with the mystery and then also figuring out what's going on in here. There's
Right.
the two complement each other well, I think.
It's like you said, that is very much like a queer experience, is refinding yourself
Yeah.
as you get older, either as you accept your label, discover your label, or even if you've known all your life, you still go through that growth process at some point. So I do love that that is part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I love your shortened version of it, because the long version is basically your editor and I found your TikTok and then obsessively annoyed you about writing a book. So
Not obsessively annoying.
the benefits of
Oh.
me always being on TikTok, I was like, hold on. So, all right. Now, before we go any further, of course, Courtney, let's jump over to you. What is it about? And this is where I cried the last time we had this conversation. What is it about romance that drew you into writing a romance novel? And, why did you feel it was important to write queer characters in your romance novel?
Well, first of all, I'm a big like Nancy Drew girly, so I'm very excited about your detective story, Katie. Um, okay, so gosh, what drew me to my specific genre? First of all, romance.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've always been a hopeless romantic, forever and always. And I've been writing for, gosh, well over a decade now, a decade and a half. Um, and all of my books centered romance, even when I was writing like dark fantasy. The world building and magic system were highly questionable, but the romance was always there at the core. And then I discovered, I think it was like during our big rom-com boom, Helen
Right.
Wong, Jen DeLuca, and we were buddies. And I was like, who do I read next? Because I'm literally obsessed. And they were like, Kate Claiborne. So I read Kate's entire backlist at that point. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is what I want to write. Moving forward, it makes me so happy. I questioned if I would be capable of writing an adult romance because I often days don't feel like a very capable adult. um, but, I think we're all very in that same boat.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came to writing queer romance, it came from a place of me discovering my queer identity as I got older and wanting to show that on a page as a way of creating community that I didn't necessarily have growing up, as a way of entering a writing world where it was just accepted and just part of the landscape of everything, you know, not having to explain yourself or defend yourself or deal with people who don't get it. You know, it was like in this world of Fern Falls that didn't exist. And it was very healing and safe for me at a time when I really needed that. And I hope that that also translates to readers, you know, when they open the pages as well. So in romance, I think especially showing queer characters getting their happily ever after is just, I mean, hugely important. And I'm honored to be able to do that in my books.
I'm, I'm gonna hold it together. I got it.
I was gonna say, who teared up?
Yeah, no, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take a deep breath. Also, because I think I'm gonna lead us right into a part of this conversation that I was like, I should stay to the end because it's when I'm gonna ugly cry. But
Oh no,
that answer like so perfectly leads into this, and we've had a few comments from readers, especially one particularly very sweet comment that I do just want to go ahead and get up at the top of the chat. So we've had a few readers already saying happy Pride to everyone. So of course, thank you everyone. And, you know, again, thank you guys for coming and joining the chat. I, as a queer person working in publishing for a number of years now, it's, as Bart mentioned, it has really only been recently that we're getting to have these kinds of stories and really getting to promote and talk about them. And so I'm very excited to be in a position where I talked with my boss earlier this year. I was like, oh my God, this is like one of the first Junes that I'm having to like be picky about the queer authors and queer books that I get to talk about, which is such an exciting experience for me personally. But I also want to shout out, we did have this very lovely, I'm not going to read the full comment because it is a long comment, but we do have someone who is saying that as a queer person and blogger, they want to thank the authors for writing characters that they are able to relate to, especially where they get to see the struggles of LGBTQ people and their successes. So it's a very lovely comment. I did want to give it a quick shout out. And like I said, I just I wanted to open up the conversation a little bit. There's really not a question here, but a little bit of a question, you know, as people who are all in very different parts of their publishing journey and parts of their writing and storytelling journeys, I'm curious what you think about the importance of telling LGBT stories and the importance of having these narratives where, as Courtney was mentioning, we get to explore worlds where it just is. You know, it's not a fight, it's not a struggle. You just get to have a story and you get to have a happy, safe place to explore yourself. So I'm just curious if anyone has thoughts or wants to make any comments about the state of now having this large boon of books and stories with LGBT characters. And I'm particularly curious, Bart, for your perspective as someone who has been publishing for so long, you've really seen that shift in readers and storytelling. So like I said, a little bit of just a broad topic. You can take this conversation in whatever direction you want, but it just felt like it would be important to just chat about for a few minutes. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's hugely important that we have, you know, because there's still a lot of prejudice out there. There's still a lot of really ugly things going on, and putting out positive characters, putting out real characters, human beings, it's huge for our readership, but also hopefully for people who are not queer. You know, it's also a way of saying, hey, we're here, and that's why I think it's also really important that we write really good stories too, you know, so we can just say this is a queer novel or queer themes or whatever else, but it's also a really good book. And you know, and these are things that should appeal to everybody because, you know, I certainly grew up reading heterosexual stuff all the time and loving it, and it's like, why not both ways? So yeah, I guess that's all I've got.
No, that's perfect. You know, as a little bit of a guiding question, I guess, unless Courtney, Katie, if you just had anything you wanted to chime in with and say, you're welcome to. But otherwise, I think I had included this in my notes for you guys. But one thing I do want to make really clear and that I think is really special about all three of your books is that they're not just queer stories. It's not just this is a queer book. They are each their own thing that happen to feature queer characters living life.
Yes.
And I think that's also really important because I think, especially in today's day and age, and especially when this started to become more, I don't want to say popular in the mainstream, but as we started seeing more books, I think I can certainly speak for myself as someone from the South. A lot of times, all of the media I saw was sad queer stories about struggling to come out, stories about being hated, all of these things. And now we're in a place where we get to have books where it's a small town contemporary romance set on a Christmas tree farm, and it happens to be between two women, or it's a man coming back to his home to help his ailing mother, and he happens to be gay, or it's a millennial mystery that happens to have a diverse queer set of friends and experiences. And I think that's really important as well. So I'm curious, and this kind of ties in a little bit to that very first question I asked. So you can feel free to be like, Lauren, I've already answered this question, but I'm curious, did you make that conscientious choice that, yes, it's a queer character or queer stories, but it's bigger than that. It is just a story first that happens to feature this type of character. And I think I'm going to launch it over to Katie first, since you have a couple of different representations in your book. So I'm curious, I know you had mentioned that it wasn't really something you set out to do, but I'm wondering about your process as you did it.
Yeah, definitely didn't. It was, mystery first, what the characters are like second. Didn't really set out to, like, I'm going to have this amount of representation, this amount, I didn't have like quotas to fill. It was kind of just like coming up with the characters and how I wanted them to be. I think it kind of just going off of what Bart said, I think it's like just creating, like they're growing up for me. There weren't that many stories about, like you were saying, if anything, it were just like sad coming out stories or something, or even,
Right.
I mean, like even by the, for me, like by the time I was like, like 10 years ago, when I was in my teens, it was like, oh, like, sad, but like happy ending coming out stories. But it was still like the stories revolved around people coming out. And there were just still like so few, like, movies and books, so few stories where they were just like doing the things that I was reading about heterosexual people doing, like growing up. They're just like solving mysteries, So it was definitely just like, I want to write a mystery and these characters are going to be queer, because I would like to have more stories out there of queer people doing fun stuff like solving mysteries and, and things in any genre, that don't revolve around their sexuality, and even when their sexuality has absolutely nothing to do with the plot,
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's perfect because, I do have a very extensive group of friends, that little found family of other queer individuals. And let me tell you, we would not survive an escape room, so we could use a Charlotte Isles in our life because none of us are prepared to solve a mystery. So,
the funny thing is, and I don't know if I've made this canon yet, but in my head, Charlotte really bad at escape rooms.
Great.
She's not good at that.
Great. Me and Charlotte, we can team up on that and just be disasters together.
Absolutely terrible at escape rooms.
Perfect. And then I'm going to jump over to Courtney. How about for you? I know you had said that, especially within the event of love, it was really an exploration for you personally in the process of writing. So, did you set out in that process of saying, I want it to be a queer story, but I also want it to be bigger than just a queer story?
So in writing stories before in the event, my characters were all queer, and that was just like what came naturally to me to write. They're the love stories I love writing as a queer person. And especially within the event, it came like 2019, I had watched a ton of Hallmark movies in that winter and noticed how heteronormative all of the movies were. And so I really came to mess things up with this book. Like I really came
Right.
to change that. And amazingly and thankfully and beautifully, so did a lot of other people. And it kind of like our books came out at the same time. And also just like so grateful for all of the authors and publishing folks who paved the way for this boom to happen. I mean, it's been, you know, generations of this going, and to be able to have this moment where you can go to the bookstore and find a huge amount of queer rom-coms, like that just wasn't a thing, and it is a thing now because of all the people who have been here and led to this point. So thank you. And also during that time, it's still, I mean, let's be real, it's still dark politically, but it was extremely dark back then as well. And so writing this love story felt like my protest, like at a time where I had, and still honestly feel very helpless in the face of these huge, awful things. It was really great to be able to be like, put the pen to the paper and be like, well, this is the world that I want to see and create. And I hope, you know, so these books that I made, they're kind of like, you're here, you're queer, this is for you. Like this is a soft place to land for you. Right. So it's not really for, like, if people don't get it, that's fine. Like for the people who don't get it, it's not for them. It's for the people who need it. And so I guess that's how I view my work. It's for the people who need that warm hug and like affirmation that they're going to be okay.
Yes. And I mean, you already know how big of a fan of yours I am, since I fangirled all over you for the last book. But I do have to say, like, I very much concur with what Courtney said. If you are ever in a place where you feel like you need that acceptance and hug and just that warm feeling, I do have to say her books are like the ones to go to. As happy as they are, they made me cry every time because they're so happy and comforting. So I do have to like shout that out. And then again, before I make myself cry, I'm going to jump over to, Bart, did you have anything further that you would like to discuss or say? You kind of already answered the question, so I don't want to make you re-answer it, but if you had further thoughts about, your approach to writing your story and whether or not you, made that conscientious choice, or if you just wanted to write a story that you saw yourself in.
Yeah, I'm always just, I'm selfish. I always write the book I want to read, at the time it's
right.
Just what comes out. And I kind of wish that I were more, because living where I do in the middle of the country, where Iowa City is a very welcoming town, but it's still a red state, they're not like being in New York or Chicago or LA. It's just that I've not really tapped into a gay community here other than a few friends. And so it's very nice to talk to people from, the queer world that are, doing that and engaged with it. But I don't have a lot of examples of stuff. So most of it's just up here. So, yeah, sorry.
No, I think that's perfect. And I love what it makes me laugh a little bit of you saying, I write what I want to read, which is really good as an author, because anyone who has not tried to publish a piece of work before, you may not realize how many times you're going to have to reread your own work. So it's really important to like what you're writing. So it would be a little more difficult if you weren't enjoying the book you wrote. All right, so we do have some reader questions coming in. I'm going to jump over to those now for a couple of minutes. I love this question, and then I promise we're going to go into like some lighter topics as well, but I really love this question. Might be a little bit of a complicated question, so I'm going to maybe reword it just a little bit, but this follows up a little bit off of what Courtney, you were saying earlier about, having to feel like you were defending yourself, having to find yourself and work through these complicated issues and, finding your place in society. So this reader is curious, especially for people who are writing stories that may feature marginalized characters or writers themselves who are of a marginalized community. How did you feel, especially in the literary and publishing world, there is still a little bit of this stigma that says, like, you have to stay within this lane, stay within this bubble. So sorry, I don't know if this is, I say she because that's in my brain. I can't see who asked this question. So this reader is curious, did you ever feel like you were being forced into a bubble while writing? Or, if you don't want to talk about that, do you have advice for authors or people who want to be authors, storytellers, who don't want to be pigeonholed into these small spaces? How did you kind of push back against that as you were writing? I really am hearing myself talk, and that was quite a rambling way to ask that question. So please, at any point, be like, Lauren, you need to rephrase this. But I'm going to start with Katie. I feel like I haven't forced you to start in a couple of rounds. So let's start with you. Like, as you were writing, did you feel like you were being pigeonholed? Do you feel like how did you work around that? Or do you have advice for how to confront that feeling?
Yeah, I don't think I ever felt pigeonholed. I don't know. Like, are we talking about like people who like trying to write outside of your own experience, or like trying like being like feeling like forced to just only write your experience, or?
Yeah, they're asking about feeling like you are only allowed to tell certain types of stories. So
Sure.
feeling locked into a specific bubble of storytelling.
Yeah. I didn't feel pigeonholed. I know I've seen like this conversation. I hear this conversation like over and over again.
Mhm.
So many people who will get angry and be like, damned if I do, damned if I don't, that kind of thing. And it
Mhm.
seemed the overwhelming response that I've seen by a lot of people who have been in publishing, much longer than I have, people who I respect seem to be saying that like what matters most is the care that you put into it,
Mhm.
the time and the care. I writing my book, so I have characters who share like my own background, and then characters who have come from different backgrounds and have different lives than me. And I worked with some really awesome sensitivity readers who helped me portray those characters in a way that I would not have been able to do well on my own, frankly.
Mhm.
So I think that it's I think that that's really the important thing, like just the care and the time that you put into accurately representing um, those things. Is that what we're talking about? Is that
Yes.
is that right? Is that
Yeah,
good? Okay, cool.
you're doing great. Like I said,
Thank
I
you.
reworded the comment to be a little bit more open-ended because it is a fairly complicated conversation to have.
Yeah.
So this is also maybe just like my way of rewording it is also complicated. So,
No, it was,
might
and it made
have
sense. I just
to.
wanted to, I'm doubting myself that I was
You're good.
misunderstanding, but it was
No,
clear.
no,
It was.
you're all
Um,
good.
but
Yes,
yeah,
so that
I
was
think
perfect.
it's yeah, just the care and time and research and bring
Yeah.
people in, and yeah.
Perfect. Love that answer. And then I'm going to jump over to Bart quickly. Kind of the same. You don't have to answer that question exactly, but kind of that same general conversation of, as you were writing, did you feel like you were locked into a specific viewpoint or storytelling, or, how did you try to kind of push back and,
I,
how do you work outside of your, like, that marginalization feeling that sometimes we get as in publishing?
because especially at the beginning, when my first book came out,
Mhm.
it was just pigeonholed from the very beginning. It's gay fiction.
Right.
That's it, period. Even though it was a story about a dysfunctional family and
Mhm.
small town living and lots of other themes going on, it was gay fiction. And, that was,
Mhm.
bookstores all had gay fiction categories, and, usually off in the dark corner someplace.
Right.
And that's changed quite a bit. I still bridle a little bit at the term gay fiction because it's like it's just fiction. It's fiction.
Right.
characters and people doing their things, whatever their sexuality is. It's fiction.
Mhm.
But then I realize marketers have to find the niche audience. Your readers need to be able to find what they think is going to speak to them. There has to be some kind of classification. But it's really, it's really frustrating sometimes when you have a gay narrator or gay characters, or queer characters of any kind, that it's going to just get pigeonholed
Mhm.
by a lot of people, and
Right.
I don't know how you avoid that really with just the whole marketing thing that has to happen.
Right. I will say from my perspective on being on the marketing side, that is definitely it's a constant struggle because,
Yeah,
as I mentioned, as a queer person myself, I am constantly that voice in the room, being like, but it's not just a gay character. Like there's a story. Like we don't have to do just this. So it is definitely a tightrope walk. So it's always interesting to have that bigger conversation. All right, and then Courtney, how about for you? Did you feel like you were getting pigeonholed and locked into this particular way of telling a story or this particular bubble? Or, what would you say to someone who, is feeling like they're going to be pinholed into a certain way of telling a story?
So I could be incorrect, but the way I'm taking the question too is kind of like,
Yes.
how do you keep writing when your marginalization is critiqued or come into question, or you're
Yes.
called out like, hey, should you be writing that specific thing
Right.
in regards to queer authors and the queer umbrella?
Yes.
This has happened to me, and it sucked like big time. And I was not harassed about it, but there were, reviews, things that came up that came across my screen, saying, "Oh, this author can't be queer because this experience is different than mine." Essentially, right? That's what was said. And I do say this, and I am very frank about it, because there are people who are going to do that. Like there are people who have a really limited view like that, especially in my experience as being like bisexual, pansexual. Sometimes that's very difficult for people to grasp, that it's not, one or the other, or this thing or that, or it's, a spectrum. So I think whatever those people say has nothing to do with you, and you keep writing your stories for yourself and the people who you are writing for, even if that person is yourself. You don't owe anybody anything. You don't owe an explanation or a coming out. You don't owe, hey, this is my ID, so back off, so there. Like, you don't owe that. You don't owe that to anybody. And anybody who is saying something like that to you, screw them, honestly.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's all about your own comfort level. I really love this thing that Kasten Callender said one time. It was this diverse writing panel that it was like diverse, I forget the name of the convention, but it was a virtual convention during the pandemic. And Kasten said, it's more of a welcoming in than a coming out. So if you are not ready and you are whatever, you don't owe anybody an explanation. If you want to welcome them into your circle and you feel comfortable doing that, awesome. But you don't owe that to anyone, not even strangers on the internet, not even anybody in publishing, So screw them and keep writing your stories. And the queer writing community is a beautiful place and very supportive. And we have your back.
Yes, 100%.
I want to put screw them, keep writing your stories on a t-shirt.
I love it.
I was gonna say that should be, we should make that like the official like Kensington merch from now on. I'm gonna take it to the bosses and see if they'll let me get away with that. Yes, I will say I was trying to reword and reframe the question, because I didn't want you to be put on the spot, Courtney, with having to talk about that experience.
I'm an open book.
Right. I know that was quite a rough experience. So thank you for sharing it with us and talking about it, because I do think it's very important to vocalize those things and vocalize those experiences, both because, we do have people who maybe feeling attacked themselves and don't feel like they can face it. And then also so that people realize, like, these are real, you're a real person that this is happening to. Like, when you say these things, it is a real person. There is real impact to any type of forcing someone to, acknowledge or come out when, they really shouldn't have to. So, but thank you, Courtney, for sharing your story and your experience. And thank you, everyone, for this particular part of the conversation. I'm going to steer us into a lighter position of conversation now. I'm trying to keep us balanced here, so we're not just talking about the heavy stuff.
More T-shirt ideas. What's everyone's ideal
I was about
T-shirt?
to say, everyone drop a fun T-shirt slogan in the chat. I'm so mad I did not get my coffee mug out. I just had a coffee mug my friend made me that says "Disaster Ace" in the rainbow flag. Because I am a disaster, and that is also my label. So I was like, I love a fun slogan. So if you have a fun slogan for any reader-oriented thing, or just a slogan in general, please.
I know it's not a slogan, but I got. Oh wait, hold on. It says "per ride."
I think that's
cute.
That's perfect. Please, I'm gonna need a shop link to where you found that, because I'm gonna need that. All right. So in the vein of going a little bit lighter, one of our readers is curious if you could swap lives with any character in any of your books, or your most recent book, either option. What character do you want to swap lives with? And Katie, sorry, I'm gonna make you go first again, but that's only because you got the one book. So I'm gonna let Courtney and Bart have a minute to think about it.
But I have less options.
I was about to say yours is a little compact, and I feel like it's gonna be a little bit of a cheat for me to make you go first.
I can go through them more, but now I'm like, all right,
whose life would you want to swap?
Because everyone's kind of struggling. Not necessarily in a bad way. The book's a fun time, but right. I want a chill, easy life, and no one's having a chill, easy time.
No.
Charlotte's brother Landon. I feel like Landon's chilling. He has his own apartment. He has a great girlfriend. Supportive family, a good job that he likes. I think I would probably swap with Landon. Landon has it pretty good.
I was gonna say, I feel like Landon has the least amount of chaos happening.
Yeah.
The chaos.
The biggest thing happening in his life is that his sister isn't texting him back. He's trying to deal with that. So and as an only child, I personally haven't experienced that, so I'm willing to try new things. I'll deal with that.
I will. I'll give you my brother if you would like to experience that.
Yeah,
life.
Tell your brother to not
problem.
Text me so I can experience that.
Perfect. All right, and then I'm gonna jump over to Courtney next. Courtney, if you could trade lives with any of your characters, who would you want to swap lives with?
Oh, shoot. I think in the case of heartbreak, I would probably be Gma, so Ben's grandma.
Yep.
She's my icon, and she is very heavily inspired by my own grandmother. So, it's just she throws lavish parties and doesn't care about anything, or anybody telling her what to do. Mm-hmm. She's my icon, and I love her.
To say Gma is actual goals for life. I'm I'm gonna be her when I grow up. That is yes.
I forget what somebody said, but they wrote me because she has a little bottle of booze in her bra that she carries around. And oh man, they had the best name for it. It was bra booze or something. Anyway.
You're going to figure it out. And then that will also be a slogan we make. Yeah. That for our next book swag, that's what we'll make. All right, Bart, how about you? If you could be any character from one of your books, whose life are you going to swap with?
I was just flashing back on all of my books and realized all my characters are so dysfunctional. I don't want to be like,
exactly.
yeah, it's like I've often said that my first novel and now my sixth one, which is a sequel told by the same narrator, that especially him at 17, he is me at 17 that I wish I'd been, because he was so
Right.
of us. He figured himself out a lot sooner than I did, you know, and he was very much like, screw you, this is who I am, I'm gay, whatever. And, you know, I was not like that, because, you know, that just wasn't. And so
Right.
I'd like to be that part of him. And I have an old lady character who, in the distance between us, who I love, but she's a bitch on wheels, you know, and I would love to be her, but
we get along.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think she's great, but yeah, she's got so much pain and suffering in her life that it's like, no, I don't want to be her either. Just aspects of some of them, but you know.
Right. Yeah, I do think that's always the complicated part of this question is like, well, if they're in a book, they probably have something going wrong in their lives in some way or form, unless it is like a purely happy, fluffy romance, which nothing against. That's what I devour 90% of the time. But like otherwise, there's probably something going wrong somewhere. So yeah, it is a little bit difficult to say that you want to live that type of, you know, chaos and dysfunction.
Right.
But it does warm my heart that 9 times out of 10, when I ask these questions, almost every time the authors and I will say, oh, I've got this one old lady character. And that's who almost every time we land on the old lady character.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that says about all of us, but it does, you know, it's a good connector, I think, for everyone.
I think old ladies come into their power in a way that
Yes.
older women do not. Older women, I've always known older women who are so strong and just so will not put up with any shit. And I love that. You know, it's just like great. Yeah. So
Yes. I do concur. I do think there is something about, you know, especially in books and in media, and in real life too, we do see like the older women get, I think the more they're like, no, I'm not putting up with this anymore. You know, side story, case in point, I'll never forget running like a bingo game, and these two old women who were best friends, clearly had known each other their entire lives, spent the entire afternoon yelling and cursing at each other for cheating off of each other. But they were clearly best friends. And I'm like, that's who I'm going to be one day in my life. So I do love it. But I just had to shout out, like, I do love that almost every time I ask this question, it ends up being the old woman that everyone wants to live, either hang out with or, you know, become. All right. Jumping over to the next reader question. I'm going to try to speed through a couple of these because we have just, you know, about 10 minutes or so left. I know I really derailed us on a couple of points, so we're going to try to bang out a couple of these. But for you, what is the best part about finishing your book? And let's go with Bart first, since you have written a number of books. For you, what is the best part about finishing?
I love printing up the first draft. Once you finally get your basic story in place, I mean, it still may suck or whatever else, but at least once you print it and you've got like, I like the hard copy thing still. I like to work off of a hard copy when I'm revising and that stuff. And there's a wonderful feeling of just like seeing it pile up on the table. And it's like, okay, I did this. And you know, there's a lot of work after that, but that is definitely my favorite.
Right. I love that you know, like you print it yourself and you do a hard copy, because I do know, and you know, Katie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in my experience, a lot of younger writers no longer print it all off. It's just all digital. So I kind of love the idea of like that physical printing of everything.
I did consider it because I know that people have done that, and I was like, I do understand that. I was sent like the, you know, the past pages, and that's like the physical stack, and I do get it. Like I get the appeal of like having it, being able to like write into it, but I didn't do that.
I was like, I don't want to put her on the spot and say she didn't do it, but I have a feeling. Well, let's jump over to you next. What is your favorite part about, you know, especially since it's your first baby? What was the best part of finishing?
I think, well, and I'm glad that Bart said after the first draft, because that's the one thing, is that it feels like it's never done, or like, you finish, but it's
Right.
like then there's always something else to do. So the first thing I thought of was, it's not technically finished at that point, but when I get to like send it to other people for the first time, for the first book, I had the first other person who read it was one of my best friends since like literally preschool, and just like having, after this story that's been in your head for so long, and like you've written it out and you're the only person who's living in this world, like sending it to someone else, and just like, because it's a kind of like a tree falls in the forest thing. It's like, is a book if you're the only one who's read it? I feel like the answer is yes, but it does feel a little more like a book when someone else is consuming it and enjoying it, and confirming that, yes, this makes sense to me, and it's not just like something that you put on paper that only makes sense to you in your head. So that was an enjoyable experience for sure.
I love that. As an aside, I say it almost once every time we do an author chat. There's always a moment that makes me go, yeah, that's why I'm not a writer. And it's because I could never get to the point of letting someone else read my writing. That to me is like absolute anxiety. But I love that that's your favorite part. All right, Courtney, how about you? What is your favorite part about finishing either the book or your first draft?
My favorite part about finishing the first draft is just giving self-doubt the middle finger, because the whole time I'm
Perfect.
drafting, it doesn't matter how many times I do it, my brain tells me I can't. So as soon as it's done, I'm just like, yeah, this is cool. It exists. We can make it now.
Yes.
That
Perfect.
feeling
I
of relief.
do. I love that. I love any moment where someone could be like, you know what, imposter syndrome? No. I was gonna cuss, and then I was like, my bosses are gonna watch this later. You guys can cuss, I can't cuss. So
Oh, I've
we'll
almost
just
cussed like 25
All right.
times.
no, you guys are fine. I'm like, I don't think I can get away with this. But imagine that that's what just happened. All right. I'm gonna try to squeeze in this last reader question. Maybe we'll squeeze in two, but I'm gonna try to get this one. I think it's gonna be a little bit of a thinker unless you just know off the top of your head. But I love this question. I think it's really sweet. This reader said that you all have written books that help make people feel seen. What is the first book that made you feel seen when you read it? Like I said, a little bit of a tricky question sometimes to like, I know I can, every time someone asks me a question like this, I'm like all of a sudden forget what words are.
I've
So
forgotten every book I've ever read in my life.
exactly. So I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. If someone just wants to like raise their hand, start talking first, if you know your answer to this question, what is, and even if it's not like the first book that made you feel seen, what is a book that made you feel seen or brought you the comfort that you hope your books bring to someone else? We'll broaden it out, give everyone a chance to remember a single book they've ever read.
I have like it's a little not answering the question. It's a little like a
Perfect.
cheat. Um I recently read The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan and Mark Rushiro, which is
Mhm.
a book in the Percy Jackson universe, and I grew up with the Percy Jackson books. Uh and these are all like middle grade books. I started reading them when I was in middle school, and they're still, like
Right.
bumping them out. But this The Sun and the Star is very queer.
Mhm.
The like main two characters are two boys, and they're dating, and it was just I know that so many people, I mean, there's a joke that's like, if did you you read Percy Jackson as a kid, you're queer now, like that's
Right.
overgeneralization, but I know that like so many people my age who are queer, who grew up with those books, have just like loved this book just because
Mhm.
it's like, one, at least one character, these two characters who we've known for so many years in this world that we've been reading about characters in for so many years, and it like finally seeing ourselves like reflected in that world in such like a beautiful, caring way. This was Rick Riordan co-wrote it with Mark Oshiro, who is a queer author who's written a lot of queer books themselves, in order to try to write this accurate and story, and it was just so lovely, and it was definitely made me feel seen as like a Percy Jackson kid. It was like, you know, growing up being like, I'm a demigod, and it's also like, oh yeah, I'm a queer demigod, and they exist in the books too. Is really nice. Yeah.
No, that's perfect. I don't know how, but I missed the Percy Jackson thing. Like I think I was like just past it, but I am like a huge like Marco Shira fan, so like I keep in the back of my mind. I'm gonna read them just so I can get to that book. But I love that answer, and not a cheat. I think that's a perfect answer.
Great.
All right, and then Courtney, Bart, whichever one of you wants to go next. What is a book that either first made you feel seen or now like makes you feel seen and brings you comfort?
Courtney, you want to go?
Okay. So I pulled.
Still thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, this one. It's The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black. I remember finishing this book and just like holding it to my chest and crying. Our main character is named Hazel, and she is an angry, hurt little girl. And her brother Ben has the most beautiful love story with a prince. And between the two of them, I just like couldn't even handle it. Wait, could I read you a quote actually?
Of course.
Okay. It says, so this is, it's a spoiler. Ooh.
Oh, well, if it's a spoiler, then no. I do have to say no.
I can't.
That.
Never mind. Anyway, it has the most beautiful quote in it.
So say, if you don't care about spoilers, or if you have read the book and you want to know what Courtney's quote was going to be, like go like tweet at her or drop a note on Instagram or something. Go find her.
But it has the most tender and gorgeous queer love story. It's not the main love story, but just seeing that on the page was like, oh my God, beautiful. And then also seeing the portrayal of this little girl healing from like her childhood trauma and like being able to be angry about it was cool.
Yeah. Perfect. I love that. And now I am very curious what the quote was going to be. So I'm going to like DM you later and be like,
oh my God.
Quote. I love a good book quote. I'm a sucker for a good quote.
It makes me cry every time.
Bart, have we stalled long enough? Do you have a book in mind?
I did flash back on, it came out, I think, in like 1985, which was at that point I was just finishing college, but it's a book by Keith Hale called Clicking Beat on the Brink of Nada. And it was a story about young teenage gay guys coming to terms with their sexuality. And it was very frank and very, very beautifully written, very clean, very simple story. But it was the first time that I'd read something like that was so frank and so like, okay. And I was no longer a teenager at that point, but I was still new to me. So it was like, okay, this is great. Yeah. And it never made much of a splash, but it's still out there in the world.
Sometimes those end up being the best books, in my opinion, is when you find a book that, and as someone who works in publishing, it makes me sad that more people haven't read and discovered it. And, of course, then I go into my bookseller mode of forcing it at anyone I talk to. But I often find there are sometimes those books that it's like, okay, only 10 people in the world have read this book, and it is the book that changed the course of my life. And I don't know, there's something special about that. I always love that. So thank you for all three of you sharing your books. I do have to say, before we log off, readers, you guys throw me a wrench every time, because I now warn our panelists that you are going to ask for a book recommendation or the most recent books. I try to warn everyone so we don't forget. And then every Q&A, you find a new way to phrase the question that throws that out the window. So I love it. Thank you. But you're really making it hard for me to prep our panelists here. I gotta start coming up with a good way to like blanket hold it and just have everyone come prepared with like a list of 10 books that will fit any variation of this question.
I will say you did warn us, and I did come up with a couple books, and one of them was The Sun and the Star. So I just found a way to make the question work for me.
Perfect. That does work. I mean, that does bring me. We are at the top of our hour. hour. But because I did warn everyone, and I do always love hearing recommendations, if you want to give a shout out to a book that you recommend to readers, please let's do that now before we close out. Katie, if you have a different book that you want to shout out other than the one you just snuck into our last question, you can. But if you want to give a book rec, please feel free to do so. And again, like the last question, I'm just going to let whoever wants to go first go first. If you don't have a book rec, that's good too.
The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. It just came out, I think, last year. It's about two young male slaves on a southern plantation, and kind of who fall in love, and the world goes to hell. But it's beautiful writing, and not a cheerful book, but wow, what a book.
I was about to say, just that description is going to make me cry, so I have a feeling I'm going to have to regretfully pass on that.
Yeah.
I can't do a sad book.
Yeah, it's also oddly uplifting too. I mean, there's a lot of really nice moments, but yeah, it's a little dark. So. Right.
All right, and then Courtney, Katie, do you have any books that you want to give one last shout out to?
I just saw Courtney mute themselves, and I was like, okay, I'll go. I would recommend Light from Uncommon Stars by, I don't know if I'm saying their name correctly, Rika Aoki. It's so hard to explain what it's about. It's like sci-fi. Anyone who's read it knows why I'm struggling to explain what it's about. It's like sci-fi. It's a sci-fi fantasy. It's queer. There's like donuts and violins, and it deals with the devil, and it's just a roller coaster of a book, but it's very fun, very good, very heartwarming. And then also doubling down on my The Sun and the Star recommendation. Okay. Those two, those are mine.
Perfect. I may be tagging you after this. Be like, hey, what was that one sci-fi chaos book again?
Yeah, Light from Uncommon Stars.
Okay, because I have a friend that, as you were like talking about it, I was like, she's gonna want to read it.
Yeah.
So okay, noted. All right, and then Courtney, how about you? I know readers, I will say as an aside, if you really want a lot of book recs, Courtney gave us so many book recs for our reading challenge. You can find it on our blogs.
Like 50.
Yeah, like Courtney, and I will. I've not to like put you on the spot, but I loved it because every couple of minutes I would sometimes get a follow-up email like, "Can I add this one too?" My favorite.
That's
so
true.
Courtney is a true bookworm deep in her heart. So Courtney, do you have a rec?
You and I, rewritten by Chip Pons, is it's so good. It's one of my favorite romances. That Summer Feeling by Bridget Morrissey is just like summer in a bottle. It's beautiful. All the Right Notes by Dominic Lim just came out. An Island Princess Starts a Scandal by Adriana Herrera. I mean, Adriana, please. Icon. That's just a few. And then we have...
As I say, Courtney has a whole stack sitting here. I love it.
Hannah Tate, Beyond Repair by Laura Piper Lee is coming out early next year. And it is just a delight with a bisexual main character. Love it. All of them. So good.
Perfect. And yeah, like I said, if you want more recs, especially romance recs, go check out our blog. I'll also put it in our Facebook group. But Courtney gave us some amazing book recs earlier this couple weeks ago, but we just put it up last week, I believe. So we have lots of book recs from Courtney, and I believe Bart, you also gave us some book recs, if I remember correctly. So we've also got Bart's book recs. Who knows? Maybe next I will force Katie to write me a book rec.
I chickened out. I opted for doing something else because I'm
always...
always...
I feel like I made Katie do a whole bunch of other stuff, and I maybe didn't make you do a book rec.
I'm always just so nervous that I'm not that people won't get the books that I like, and that but I just gotta put them out there, and they'll find the right people.
I fully understand. I also struggle to every time. every time. Like, you work in publishing. I'm like, yeah, I don't ask me. I cannot recommend you a book. Um, pure anxiety. All right. Well, we are over our hour. I promised I would not keep you guys super late. So I am going to go ahead and end our chat, as much as I want to keep talking because you guys are so awesome to talk with. Readers, you guys had some great questions. There were some great comments. I did see some of your slogans in the comment section. So thank you for playing along.
Merch.
I'm definitely just going to like send those over to my boss and be like, hey, look,
I love that.
It. So thank you so much to everyone for spending the evening with us. And please stay tuned. We've got another Pride panel coming up at the end of the month, as well as our book club discussion at the end of the month. And you never know, I may force these particular panelists to come join me again in other avenues and ventures. So stay tuned, and hope to chat with everyone again soon. So thank you to our readers, thank you to our panelists, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Pride!
And happy Pride.
Take care.